I really like Berlin's multiculturalism and its freedom of expression. I have a tough time living in places that don't have that, or in even being in places that don't have that. And I think Berlin has a sort of collectivism that I've been thrust into that I really love, where it's like everyone I know here is like from somewhere else, actually. And I appreciate that a lot. And that the city can kind of sustain that.
I do not know how it would be if I grew up here, but I have the sense and I see that people are more free somehow and they have more options, like or living more freely, what you want to be or how you feel yourself. I find here it's like you have the options and you have the means of being that person. I mean, I have learned how to say no, and this is something I did not know before. When society had so many options, and you learn how to choose things according to your own wishes, and the other society did not have options, they just had tasks. And you grew up having tasks, and you have to do the tasks. So I think that's the difference, like when you grow up in a society where options are given, or when you grow up in a society where tasks are given. So what do we do then?
I think one hard truth is kind of that, whatever your early childhood formation was is also what probably throughout your lifetime will feel most close, almost like stable in you as a setting. But I mean, at the same time, I've never felt quite comfortable in the individualist matrix. I've also always had a hard time really, really accepting the culture around here, which is so much about distance and respecting people's individual freedoms and their right to silence and their right to, close doors and there's more transaction-based interaction than just having an interaction because you want to or because you can.
So I mean, growing up in a hegemonic, like North American, hyper individualized culture meant a lot of propaganda being pumped into my brain from a very young age, which everybody knows about, right? The American dream. It was something that also, I think, inspired a lot of immigration, but it's more of like a self-reflective tool or a tool that keeps you wanting more and wanting to consume more, or it keeps you in a place of, if I could just work hard enough, I could achieve this exception to the rule. So like we all kind of acknowledge the rule is that maybe hard work gets ignored and maybe everybody's everybody's kind of on their own and we don't really want to invest in any structures in the community or in the state to take care of each other. We just want to always like have the possibility of like being lucky enough to be the one that got out.
So there's not like a huge cultural conversation about Asian American identity until the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, because it's been a dangerous topic. And or this model minority myth sort of being like, oh, you're the best minority. And like the stereotypes that are associated with that those ethnicities, which are completely yellow washed into one bucket category, are good at education and good at working and good at this and good at that and good at this, and how that like holds up the indentured servitude that brought them to the country in the first place. There was no social mobility for Asian people for 300 years in North America. So that's why Chinatowns exist, actually. It's because they were initially ghettos. They were sort of like immigration ghettos in a way. Recently, I've started realizing how much my family acts like salmon, where it sort of like attracts themselves to those places without claiming that it's because of proximity to cultural identity and understanding, or like a sense of collectivism, but that like most of my family lives in those places.
When you use it to something, you use it to something, you have no comparison, so it's just your normal thing, you know, like. And I never thought about my way of living as community or individualistic or anything else in between or around it or one on another. It was just the way I live. And then I came here, I landed in a house project, and the house project in Berlin, it's a community shared space where people supposedly live together and share everything. And they are very political, very active, very like leftists. For me, it was a dream house, the way they sold it to me, and I bought it somehow. And then being there was a completely different experience. I also see like the kind of people they seek for their home. It's like activists that fit into their own activist description. So they were expecting the new persons to tell them their activist CV, which was really weird. Because sometimes there would be like people coming there not having the same language to explain what the activism is, and would be like persons coming from a completely different continent with a completely different reality, dealing with a lot of other topics in life that are very leftist, very radical, very subversive way of living. And it's like this survival thing that's constantly fighting for your life, for the basic things. And for me, like, those people are activists, but the very like reason that they could not explain their life in an activist, leftist, German specific language, they would be already crossed out. They were just like not considered as activist enough. What is community now? Because this house was built or was created on the first place to be a community space. But when the community that comes is not the community we wish for, it's no longer community. It's just like, it's an accessory that you can go out and say, yes, I host refugee in my house.
But what can hold us together, like, if we're all economically precarious? I feel often very defeated, and I feel like the system that we're trying to create an alternative towards, or the system that is so individualistic and oppressive, like, that one is winning. Yeah, when I feel like this loss of a collective, you know. But I think there's also like a hyper focus on longevity as a value, that like that's only worth something, like if you did that for a certain amount of years, because we do need some stability, and we do need this stuff to like survive emotionally and physically in this annoying state of late capitalism. Maybe that's just a myth that we have to deconstruct, that like for the alternatives that we build, or for the love that we cultivate to be valuable, it must last forever.
You know, you have different species and different ways these species exist. And if you look at it from a very, scientific or like biological, historical point of view, humans would have never survived much of what they survived if they hadn't acted collectively and thought and fought collectively. That's one point, and individualism therefore is a very modern phenomenon that I think stems from the benefits of industrialization, and like the ability to hoard wealth and to therefore be able to survive on very individual terms, which then again like goes hand in hand with a huge loss of culture and loss of heritage and understanding of oneself, because I think then everything becomes so fluid that the concrete pillars that like kind of were the base of any human group on the planet kind of vanish, and what is left behind is Darwinism, brutal capitalist ways of capitalizing on money and physical wealth, but also capitalizing on spiritual or like the wealth of being seen and being liked and being important, but at the same time not really depending on anybody, and therefore being able to move away whenever something's inconvenient.
I think we all met when we all weren't from there, or most of us weren't, and we were all a bit lost. And there was like a political wave, like this like queer feminism, like boom, people were really feeling it. And it felt so important to like be around other people who were also feeling that. But I didn't have the knowledge to articulate like a shared politics. They were all like studying gender, and they like read all these books, and I didn't read any of those books. I read a bit of poetry, but like I didn't read any of this like high theory Judith Butler shit. So I didn't know how to talk to them, So there was like a strong attraction, and it felt like, yeah, we had to like be together somehow. So there was like some draw that was political and some draw that was like survival, like we need each other.
In my understanding of being an immigrant or other people being immigrants, there's an isolation to it, but there's also like this desire and hunger for collectivism because you need to survive and support each other. And so we were really just coming together to play for ourselves in the beginning. And then we realized we were coming together to play for our own mental health. And then we started realizing we're coming together to play for other people's mental health. And that made us feel a sense of urgency, I think, and importance in doing such a thing, because a lot of us were feeling a bit useless as artists and not feeling like we were essential workers. But it gave us a way to feel kind of essential.
Most of the people within that group are musicians. All others are also creative individuals. Most of us have inclination towards social justice ideals, and most of us are of diverse heritage. A huge negotiation ground for how to exist together and what existing together means, and also a big push and pull of distance and closeness, and realizing like that also in every group, I think like in every society, you have people clinging to one another, and then people being, you have people that are closer, people that are more distant. You have like different circles within a circle, and obviously discussions and sometimes conflict around power and access and space to exist in, and being seen and being heard and hearing and seeing others.
there is this tendency of protecting people according their identity, which I think is very problematic. Because when someone from our own community, you try to protect community in all costs, and when someone from our own community is doing something that's really harmful and really bad, there's always like this identity politics jumping in. And I think in certain extent it's important to understand how we even got there, or the mechanisms behind it that brought this person to take that action. And I think we should all be given a chance to repair and to change and to take an active step to not do it again. And I think if your community, the people around you that loves and cares about you, are kind of covering the situation, and then I think it's a problem. And I think that's when community accountability completely fails.
I think the individualist culture that I was indoctrinated with meant to teach me how to avoid pain. And I think that's only one aspect that I've figured out more recently, but it's also about how to avoid accountability to each other. But the pain thing, it makes it really hard for me now to practice more acceptance around the pain that we all encounter and the pain that exists, and like acceptance of the imperfections in the way that we try to live together.
Doing things for myself feels much less valuable, much less important than doing things for other people, which sometimes comes out of like a fucked up version of philanthropy, or like narcissistic philanthropy or something, and I'm really digging into these things for myself personally. But I also experience a lot of like, I think, artistic freedom within a group context because I can do a lot of those supportive things, which is interesting, because then it's like I end up being depended on for doing stuff, which to a lot of people maybe doesn't feel like freedom, but to me feels like there's a purpose for what I'm doing. Whereas when I'm doing something just for myself alone, it's hard to feel like it matters. It's a tricky one because I'm also recognizing that that's not always a healthy way to be, and to actually experience and choose, if one is able, more individual freedom, or to seek that, is really important in order to sustain community health too. I could also imagine that for someone to not have personal freedom and then to experience it would be like, never take this away from me again.
I think it is a very important and helpful step in the reinvention of humanity, like to go through individualism. And I think that all of humanity is going to go through this phase in some form or another, or is already going through it. Specifically because of the limitations of collectivism, and especially limitations of the imagination, the level of imagination and of personal freedom you can attain in collectivist societies. But for me, both my parents' stories are very inspiring and important as to understand, and also like they bring me back to a certain feeling of gratitude towards what they gave to me, because they gave me a lot of freedom I don't see so many people have, especially not with kids with migrant parents. Like And specifically speaking about the Muslim community, what my dad did was quote unquote outrageous. To not introduce me to Islam, to not make me grow up with narratives around we are here but your home is X country, in his case Algeria, this is where you're actually from, that is by standards of the Muslim community very, very unnormal, and can be treated as weak or submissive, but I think it's actually very strong. So I don't see individualism as a horrible thing. I just think pure individualism, as especially in a system like capitalism, there's just not enough moral control over people.
I think that's one of the things I find most exhausting about community, I would say. Like, whose responsibility is it? The, like, emotional state of the collective. And how can we hold all these different emotional states? Where's the space for all of our emotions, I think, is even a bigger question for me. And that's why taking a break and co-regulating your nervous system with other beings that are not the ones that you're constantly negotiating what tasks you need to manage together or what you want to create together or how you want to live together, because that's a lot to have in a really like insular space without the support of these like much wiser beings that are out there in the forest freaking living collectively and in community anyway, and we think we can't learn from them because they can't talk. Yeah, and I don't know if the trees ever thought about personal autonomy and freedom. What a question. I mean, the trees also didn't choose to be planted there, didn't choose to be a part of the community they grew up in, and they're spending many years, just like we are, learning how to be together and how to share resources and time and support. And it's pretty direct, this like comparison, no?
Communities care, understanding, being there, communities just like supporting the people you love. And communities also like motivating each other. It's also like celebrating yourself. It's also joy, and I think it's a lot of joy. And if you have a community that's not celebrating joy, this is not your community. This is just like a group of people that decided that this is gonna be the object of study of something.
If you're trying to redefine certain things, or you don't want to just adhere to the simple like normativity of the space you grew up in, and just the simple laws and right and wrong, and especially like binary narratives, things become much more difficult and complex, which again is why I think humans, especially in the past, chose and had to choose much more simplistic models of explanation and modes of existing in terms of narratives in order to make do and get through. But we are now technologically so advanced that we can afford to become much more complex and much more therefore so inclusive of ideas and individual sentiments and feelings. Now it's just about how we reformulate that into a culture that can exist and that can nourish us and make us feel safe, because I think it's a very unstable state that we're in right now, which is the state of reform.
I want a vision together with more people, I want to like shape it together. And it has to be able to change. That's really important.